I don't think it's right to say, okay, create an art community. But given the size of Hong Kong, museum attendance is quite low compared to, say, London, New York, Paris, proportionally. The number, the number of kind of world-class artists compared to Beijing or Chongqing or wherever is pretty low. Hong Kong has had a history of being a very entrepreneurial, hugely entrepreneurial, a hugely successful economic space. It's time now for cultural goods, perhaps, or more cultural goods to be created. And, how do you obviously can't make something like that happen, but doesn't it make sense to expose, to have spaces that can expose Hong Kong artists to a global public, and to have maybe also global artists come in more, than we have it now in Hong Kong? I mean, doesn't Hong Kong need more of a cultural entrepot? I mean, for example, I go into Shanghai, and right away somebody says, go to the MoCA. I come into Hong Kong, I go into Guangzhou, and people say, go to the Guangdong Museum of Art. I come into Hong Kong, and somebody have to tell me on my third or fourth visit to go to the Hong Kong Art Museum. It doesn't have it. Somehow you don't naturally go there. I mean, does it need better? I mean, I'm not trying to disagree with you, but I mean, ways in which it can become more of a global entrepot, as well as a space for, a kind of broader and wider exposure of Hong Kong artists, theaters, sound artists, which is now getting interesting here, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to disagree with you. I'm just wondering.
We don't want to have to pay the price like the LV show that Museum of Art just did. That on the second floor is all the international artists, and then the LV bags.
Who was on the second floor?
The second floor was all the LV artists, LV collection.
And the ground floor was.
And then the
Richard
floor,
Prince was there.
Richard Prince was wrapping the whole museum as well as in their collection.
Okay.
And the Hong Kong artist, they picked 7 one.
Okay.
And it was curated by a Chinese curator that the artist never knew.
Who's the curator?
It was a Chinese curator.
Who? Remember?
I forgot the name because they never this curator never interacts with people like me in Hong Kong. But he did, from the artist that was involved, he did visit a few times to pay visit to the artists that he selected, and they were placed on the third floor by their own within a small corner. So
they didn't get much space.
Right, and it was on a totally different floor. They were separated, so it was the kind of exposure that people say that, you see, we sponsor local artists as well.
Why was it an LV show?
When was it?
Why was it an LV show? Why wasn't it a Gilbert and George show or a Bruce Nauman show? Why was it an LV show? And how? In what sense? How did that happen? The one of the most famous shows in Hong Kong was an LV show.
It was it was more controversial one, but I only heard a few critics that complain about it. The idea was that the governments always try to bring in shows that are ready-made composed, so they don't have to pay the fees for. So they sometimes see who's touring around, and so they grab that kind of shows to show. For LV shows, the LV foundations will be paying for the shipping across. So they thought that they are paying a little proportional sum, but it's still 619 million Hong Kong dollars.
What?
For decorating the venue.
Wow.
And that was almost 18% the annual budget of collection and exhibition.
Really?
Right.
60 million pounds, like English pounds, sort of thing. A lot.
For record, it's
so much.
Hong Kong dollars. So
It's about 10 or 11 or 12, maybe 50 million English pounds. That's huge. That's like a big Tate Modern show.
They say.
Has he been involved in WKCD?
Right, he is going to be the chairman of
WKCDA?
the committee. Chief curator in the Hong Kong Museum, for example, for this shows, he didn't even bother to ask the advisors whether we should do an LV show.
Are you an advisor?
I'm not, but
he's got a group.
He got a group which is already not very good representative, but he didn't even
ask them.
Dare or did ask them.
What's his name? Who's the head of the Hong Kong Museum?
It was Dan Hoi Chiu.
Dan Hoi Chiu.
Right. And so we formed a group that called Museum Concerned Groups and Porters Against this, and they try to play with the bureaucratic responses, etc. But I wrote about this in the newspaper, and it even extends some pressures to not the government, not the museum, but rather the newspaper editor. The boss of the newspaper don't like the editor publish my articles, which therefore she actually, from what I heard, she resigned.
Given that there's going to be a WKCD, what would be the way that it might work best for and with the Hong Kong community of artists, intellectuals, etc.?
Slow down its process, and we have in these few years many different places popping up, and it's medium-sized stuffs, and so we thought that we are gradually having these layers, and that we have grassroots, and then we have some medium institutions, and for museums level, we thought changing the present structure to demonstrate that we could handle, or we have enough professionals to handle these museums before we actually start another one. I think that's the way that we should do. For we are
something like don't do the building too quickly. Have temporary structures for events and kind of include.
I don't think even. Did someone propose, for example, to have an M+ somewhere to start with, etc., start building up collections, etc. But my idea is that it really has to learn to think otherwise than building up another team of professionals that might gone wrong. I thought that's. For my group, for example, Luke Cheng, an artist within our groups, I'm very positive about his idea, is that once, for example, we play with Times Square, how people use actually the public space, how we interpret Richard Pin's ambiguous advertising artwork. It's very much up to the audience to respond to that.
How did you understand what Richard Prince did? What did he do?
He reproduced some very exotic or oriental exotic cover novels images and wrapped the whole museum of art, and on the exterior of the museum, cover the whole museum.
Wow.
And over these images of the book covers are LV logos.
Over the images of the what? The book of verse.
As I show you the cards, he used the images that's coming from, for example, Susie Wong, that kind of exotic images to represent Hong Kong. He done this series before in other city, so he added in the Hong Kong, which is playing with that kind of images, and wrap the whole museum. But over all these images are the LV logos and the LV patterns, and so the museum claimed that it is an art piece, and for me it is, and we have an argument with, for example, Luke Cheng, whether this is advertising or artwork. But for my definitions, when an art...
And Luke Cheng is an artist that you really respect.
Right. He's doing many hijacking space projects, etc.
Okay,
and
cool.
he is the 31st that step out single person to protest during the opening ceremony.